And then I'm going to pin me, and I can tell you a little bit about Liza. This is very exciting. Full transparency. I have read the book. I loved it. And we'll be talking more about what the book was based on. I see my educator friends is based on, it's not based on, but it's not unlike The Wave, which we used to show quite a bit. But Liza is an award-winning educator with over 20 years of teaching experience. Her second adult novel, The Assignment, was published by Delacorte Press and has received numerous honors, including being named a 2021 Sidney Taylor Notable Book. And that's an excellent notable book award. To date, The Assignment has also been published in Russian, Polish, Italian, and Korean. Hello, her debut YA novel, was named a Goodreads Best Young Adult Novel of the Month. In addition, Liza has 2 adult nonfiction books published and several short stories. Perhaps most importantly for us, she lives in Milwaukee. She went to the University of Wisconsin, where my personal children went. Go Badgers. And so we are so happy to have you here virtually, and you live you live close enough, and maybe when this is all over, you'll come back.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much. This is such a tremendous honor to be here with all of you. And I have to say that I watched some of Vanessa's really short videos and absolutely love them. So if you haven't watched them, I highly recommend that you do, because they put smiles on my face. And it was great to laugh and to chuckle along. So thank you for that, Vanessa. And again,
I'll put that in the chance. It was a video blog when my husband and I were babysitting with my granddaughter and some of our challenges.
It's great. So especially if you need a smile. All right. Well, okay, I'm seeing, let me see. I'm trying to, oh, here we go. All right, I'm going to share my screen with all of you. And I've got a presentation. Feel free at any time to put a question in the chat, and I will make sure, we will get to them at the end. I'm going to keep my eye on the time also to make sure that we have plenty of time for your questions, and I'm happy to stay as long as, as you'd like to have me. So I'm going to share with you some behind the scenes of this novel, how I came to write it, the research that I did, and making the connection between the past and what's going on in society today. So on July 25th, 2016, I received a message from Wendy Scalfaro, who's a library media specialist at a high school in the Syracuse, New York area. And I'm going to just ask all of you a question. Feel free to either raise your hand or put the answer in the chat if you'd like. But just think about this. Have you ever had an opportunity, and instead of, taking advantage of that opportunity, you said no? And later on, you were like, oh, geez, I wish I had said yes. Well, I'd learned that lesson in my life. And Wendy had contacted me and said, I've never done an author visit before. I'd really love for you to come to our area, to my school, to talk about your debut novel, Hello. But because I've never done this, I don't really know what my budget is. I don't know how much I can afford to pay you. And at the time, my husband was freelancing. And so anyone that knows anything about freelancing, rarely are you paid on time. Money was extremely tight. And I knew that saying yes might be a challenge for them, because I didn't know if all my expenses were going to be covered. And sure enough, when we scheduled this and we made the arrangement for me to come in April of 2017, all the expenses weren't covered. I had car rental, I had a hotel, food. And so one of the things that Wendy set up for me was an event at a independent bookstore in a small town called Oswego, New York. Now, fast forward to April 4th, 2017. It was pouring rain, the kind of rain that was so heavy that even my windshield wipers could not keep up with this rain. Now, I like to be super early for my events. I like to, I don't ever want to be late. So I decided that I was going to spend the entire afternoon working at a coffee shop. And that way I would be on time for my event and I wouldn't have to deal with the hassle of the rain. Well, because it is a small town, and for those of you who are familiar with Door County, Wisconsin, very much like, closed during the winter, open during the summer. The coffee shop was closed and I was in desperate need of caffeine. So I went to this grocery store and I was kind of frustrated with Wendy because I kept thinking, why did she choose a bookstore so far away from, where I was staying? There had to be at least a half a dozen other bookstores I could have done a book signing. And, and here I was dealing with this weather. And I got to this grocery store, opened my door, and the parking lot was flooded. And I was like, well, I have the time. There's no way I'm stepping out of my car because I did not want soaking wet feet for the next, 6 hours. So I ended up going onto Facebook, and that's where I saw on my feed what just happened. New York high school students were given an assignment to argue in favor of exterminating Jews. Okay, so that caught my attention. I'm thinking, all right, I'm from Wisconsin, I'm in New York. I clicked on it, and in the very first line, it said that the assignment was given in Oswego, New York. And I went, oh my gosh, how is this possible? I'm from Wisconsin. There are thousands of small towns, and I'm in the small town where this anti-Semitic assignment was given. I started reading as much as I possibly could about the assignment, reading article after article. I saw the photo in the upper right-hand corner, and that's Jordan on the left and Archer on the right. And I kept thinking, I've got to figure out a way to meet these brave teens, but I wasn't going to any kind of high school. I was going to this independent bookstore. So I devised a plan that I was going to purchase 2 copies of my book, Hello. I was going to write each one of the teens a note, and then I was going to ask the bookstore owner to find their addresses and send my note and the book to the students. And then I thought, well, what if he's an anti-Semite too? Because there were many people that were writing in comments that they completely disagreed with these students. And there were also anti-Semitic comments directed toward these teens. And I was like, well, nope. This is the plan. I certainly wasn't going to look up their addresses and show up at their house. So lo and behold, I did not need the plan. I took 4 steps into the bookstore, looked up, and there was Jordan. And I went, oh my gosh, it's the world famous Jordan. And Jordan looked at me and she said, how do you know who I am? And I said, let me show you my phone. And I started showing her all the articles that I read about her and Archer. And I said, you are so brave. You are a hero. And that was it. She burst into tears. And the bookstore owner walked over to me, whispered in my ear, you have no idea what that means, for her to hear that. And so that night I had a 3-way conversation between Archer and Jordan. I ended up writing an article. And when I returned to Milwaukee, I told a friend of mine, an author friend, about this, this story. And she said, Liza, you were born to write this novel. So sure enough, I made the decision to write the novel. And there's more background to that too. But please feel free to go to my website, lizawiemer.com, and read the behind the scenes for making the novel. What you're seeing in front of you is part of how I write books. I like to utilize real people, even though the novel is fiction. I get my inspiration from real people. So the photo in the center, that's my grandparents. My grandma loved to cook. And I used to call her up and say, excuse me, may I please speak to Julia Child? And she would say, Julia Child speaking. And then we would talk recipes. So she was my inspiration for the Nana in the story. Now, my grandfather was the biggest kibitzer. And the photo on the left is my grandpa in a play for BBYO. And he had, he was a jokester. He loved to, tell stories. And so he was my inspiration for the grandfather in the story. The photo on the bottom right, that's Jack and Renee DeGola. Jack was a Holocaust survivor, and he told me his Holocaust story. And so the Holocaust survivor in this novel is essentially his story. There's a twist in the novel, and I'm not going to share what that is. That was not a part of his story, but that was also inspired by real people. The photo on the top is Jack and Jack's parents. His father died before the Holocaust. His mother ran a bakery. His brother died in the Holocaust, and Jack and his mom survived. And they had a reunion here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1948 when someone who knew Jack saw an ad in the forward for any survivors of the DeGola family. So that's how he reconnected. Now, this novel is about two brave students speaking up when their teacher gives them an assignment, asking them to pretend that they're one of the 15 Nazis that attended the Wannsee conference, where they came together to implement the final solution of the Jewish question, in other words, the Holocaust. And these students were supposed to pretend that they were Nazis, pro-exterminate Jews, con put Jews in work camps and ghettos and sterilization. That was the so-called debate. But there was no debate. The men at the table did not deliberate whether such a plan should be undertaken, but instead discussed the implementation of a policy decision that had already been made at the highest level of the Nazi regime. So not only was this assignment ridiculous from the perspective of a debate, but it also was a huge issue from the perspective that it caused tremendous curriculum violence. No one should ever have to pretend that they're Nazis and debate the merits of genocide of any people. So one of the things that the real teacher did, and that I also implemented in my novel, was they showed the movie Conspiracy. Now, Conspiracy, I found out in my research through Dr. Alan Goldberg, who was a professor emeritus at Syracuse University and a Holocaust expert. He said that this movie was the most accurate depiction of the Wannsee Conference. Now, the historical consultant for this was world-renowned Holocaust expert, Michael Berenbaum. I just want to side note say that Michael has read the book. He loved the book. And we talked about this movie I had the opportunity to talk with him about the movie. I'm going to share with you a short clip. Listen to what the actors had to say about playing the roles of Nazis. And then what I want you to do is imagine what it would be like to be, 17 and 18 playing these roles of Nazis after they saw this movie.
I am Heitek, SS Chief of Reich Security Main Office and Vice Protector of Bohemia and Moravia. And welcome. Today, each of us becomes a bearer of secrets. Even amongst a group of men who committed the most extraordinary crimes, he was unique for the ferocity and the cruelty and the intensity of what he did. We have a storage problem in Germany with these Jews. I have been asked to direct the release of Germany and all of Europe from the Jewish stranglehold, and I believe that together we will. There is never any consideration of any larger moral dimension. Inside the man, there seems to be nothing. We will not sterilize every Jew and wait for them to die. We will not sterilize every Jew and then exterminate the race. That's farcical. Dead men don't hump, dead women don't get pregnant. Death is the most reliable form of sterilization, put it that way. Everything for Heydrich was an opportunity for personal advancement. I love this house. And after the war, it will be my home. He was able to assess other people's motivation to use flattery with some, direct threat with others. I suggest your advisor serve as an assistant to my man. That preserves the relative powers of our offices, does it not? I suppose I've been acting now for nearly 20 years, and without question, playing Heydrich's been the most disturbing experience of that time.
So the most disturbing experience of his entire acting career. I think that says it all. There's more. I highly recommend, if you want to watch the movie. I believe you can, well, you certainly can get it on HBO, and it may be available on Amazon Prime also. So when I found out about this assignment and then started researching, doing my research, I really believed that this was a unique situation. I have discovered, however, that it's not unique at all. These kind of assignments are being given on a regular basis in our schools across the country and across the world. And so I wanted to share with you, just a few of them. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see this just happened in the news. DC third graders were made to reenact episodes from the Holocaust. Absolutely horrifying. In the upper left-hand corner, I was involved in helping this parent to put an end to an assignment. She wrote on Twitter, "My Jewish daughter had an assignment that required her to assign blame to various parties for the Holocaust. One of the parties was the Jews themselves, and they were not allowed to say zero, so she failed." And I reached out to her over Twitter because people were, contacting me about this. And I said, look, we have to put an end to this assignment. And we had, she had a lot of things going on in her life. And, but eventually I got her to agree that I could help to intervene. And I ended up getting the ADL involved, and they contacted the school. But in the bottom left corner, you're going to see what the assignment was. If you look at, let's see, orange, it says the Jews who did not try to escape, and black, they used, the Christian term for God, the God of the Jewish faith, who seemed absent and silent during the destruction of his chosen people. I have seen this assignment on several other occasions, which means how many other schools are utilizing this assignment. Another one that I intervened on, again, I found out about it on Twitter. This one, so the one before was in San Diego, California. The one that's on this page happened in Irvine, California, and it was given in multiple schools. So this was given to an AP World History class, and the students were asked to recreate the Reichstag election, take the perspective of the Nazis. And this Jewish girl said to the teacher, "This isn't right." And the teacher looked at her and said, "It's nothing personal." The parent contacted the developers of this curriculum, and that was, this is going to surprise you, Brown University, their choice program. And in the upper right corner, in the black box, that's the response that they got. "Hello, Becky. We certainly appreciate you contacting us. We discontinued the Weimar Germany curriculum for the very reasons you pointed out. The serious pedagogical flaw led us to stop offering this curriculum to schools many years ago." But here's the problem. Many school districts can't afford to update their curriculum. And unlike at your own homes, if you have a product that's defective or flogged, you will get, a notification and it will either get repaired or replaced. But that's not how it works with curriculum. So many school districts are still teaching this curriculum, and they don't have either teens that have the knowledge to even say that it's wrong, or they feel uncomfortable reporting it. So it goes unchallenged and unreported. So, one of the things that we talk about when it comes down to Holocaust education is, why is it that millions and millions of people, stayed silent? How was this able to happen? And so one of the things that I will, point out, and it's in this novel, goes to the Milgram Experiment. Why is it that we today have such a challenging time speaking up when we see an injustice? And that's something that when I'm done with my presentation, we can even talk about that. Why, maybe you found yourself in a situation where you wish you had spoken up, and then, later on, kicked yourself for not doing so. So I'm just going to share just a minute or so of the Milgram Experiment that was done at Yale University. And this shows human behavior. And this, I think, is insightful, for students. It's insightful for all of us.
Rug, pillow, hair, grass. Incorrect. 165 volts strong shock.
Let me out of here. I will not be part of the experiment anymore.
He says he's not going to go on.
Please continue.
He says he doesn't want to go on.
We must continue.
In nearly every case, the essential results are the same. They hesitate, sigh, tremble, and groan, but they advance to the last switch, 450 volts, because they're politely told to. I'm Stanley Milgram, and this is an experiment. The man in the other room wasn't being shocked.
Let me out of here.
Can you please go check that everything's okay?
Continue, please.
We wanted to get true reactions from people. The experiment's about obeying orders.
You could be dead in there.
Please continue.
Social relations, what does that mean?
Everything from the way people talk in elevators to the study of authority.
As human beings participate in destructive, inhumane acts.
Why is defiance the anomaly instead of the norm?
Why didn't I stop? Because he told me to continue.
You tell yourself.
Why don't I have a choice?
I wouldn't do that.
Have you done it?
I'd never do that.
That really hurt.
I don't like hurting anyone.
Let me out.
This part's where the experiment really begins.
So I'm going to stop there, but it's not a part of our natural makeup to intervene and to speak up. We have that fight, flight, and freeze instinct when we see situations like that. So we really need, especially when it comes down to students, to help them and to empower them when they see an injustice, to find healthy ways to speak up and to make a difference. And so this novel very much is about different ways to empower, not just our youth, but all of us. Okay, so one of the things that I found absolutely shocking when I did my research was that during World War II, we brought to this country 425,000 POWs. We housed them, we fed them, and we clothed them, and we actually paid them for the work that they did. In contrast, on July 21st, 1944, 982 European refugees were brought to the United States. They were brought on the ship, and they were brought to Fort Ontario. They called it the Fort Ontario Emergency Refugee Center. And you can see this fort, and that's Jordan and Archer, because I returned to the area in July to do more research. And what was so shocking about this is one, the numbers of how many refugees were saved in comparison to POWs. Two, where is this fort? In Oswego, New York. So 75 plus years later, after they had been a safe haven for these refugees, there was this anti-Semitic assignment. These refugees were kept in army barracks. They were kept behind barbed wire fences. They were brought after they landed. They were in New York Harbor. They were transported on a train, which you can imagine how terrifying that was. And if you look at this photo, there's luggage tags around their necks. It's so dehumanizing how they were treated and kept behind this barbed wire fence. And I went and I visited the museum. You can see, the photographs of some of the interior, and I incorporated this into a scene in the novel. Also, when I was there in 2017, I was just walking down the streets of Oswego, and here you can see a Confederate flag was in one of the storefronts. And sadly, this was, like it is today, a lot more common than we would ever hope to imagine. The other thing that I did was I looked at original footage, and I'm not going to show this. I just wanted to share with you that there was a U.S. Navy lieutenant, Jack Taylor. He was a POW, and he was put in Mauthausen concentration camp. His story and the research that I did ended up turning into My Peter Franklin at the end of the novel. And it very much paralleled Jack Taylor's experience. The other thing that I did was I read Ruth Gruber's book, Haven, about those refugees that came to Oswego, New York, and were kept at Fort Ontario. And something really struck me when I read it. And I'm going to share that with you. It said, okay, so the refugee doctors hovered over Aaliyah. They shook their heads. She's gone. Aaliyah, we decided, should not be buried at sea. She would come to America, the guest of President Franklin Roosevelt, to be buried in a graveyard in Oswego. When I read that, for some reason, I became obsessed by this story and this baby that died on the ship to America. And I knew I was returning to Oswego, so I contacted George DeMass, who was a past president of Safe Haven Museum and also Oswego historian. And I asked him if he could help me find the grave of baby Aaliyah. And he said, sure, there is a cemetery within a cemetery in the Riverside, and we'll go and we'll find it. So we did indeed go, and I went with Archer and Jordan. And it was a raised area, and we kept looking and looking, and we saw, these other headstones from people that died while they were at, Fort Ontario, but we could not find baby Aaliyah's grave. And at that point, George was like, I'm out of here. It was a very hot day. And, even Archer and Jordan were getting a little anxious. But I was determined. So Archer started walking around the perimeter of this raised area, and suddenly he shouted out, I think I may have found something. And he saw just the corner of the stone, the grave marker. It was completely covered with grass and leaves and dirt and all sorts of things. And we started digging and uncovering it. And of course, this is it. We see Rachel Bas Moshe Montilio, Rachel Montilio, and Rachel, of course, was baby Aaliyah's Hebrew name. Rachel would have been the English version. She was born in a concentration camp in Bari, Italy on January 11th and died on the ship to America. And here is what the marker looks like today. So I truly believe, because I was so obsessed with needing to find it, that it's now being taken care of and preserved. And I tried to find baby, Aaliyah's relatives, and I have been unable to do so. And I contacted people at the museum also, and they too have had no connection with any of them. So part of the propaganda that I included in this novel is what you see in front of us. What are you going to do about it? Stay on the job until every murdering Jap is wiped out. And what I say to students, and I say to all of you, we know that there were Japanese internment camps, but Germans weren't put in internment camps. Italians weren't put in internment camps. There were certainly Italian Americans and German Americans. Now here's the propaganda in Germany, and you see Hitler is larger than life. His back is to all the people. So what I have found as an educator that we lack in teaching history is making the connection between the past and what we see back then and what is occurring in society today. Raise your hand if you have seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix. I'm gonna just scroll down to see if we have, okay, I see a couple people. All right, but the vast majority, it seems like, have not seen it. I highly recommend that you do. For the sake of time, I'm not going to show it, but I really want to encourage you to understand the connection between propaganda in the past and the propaganda of what we see today. I see Pamela, you have your hand raised. Is there something, do you want to unmute and just share a comment?
No, I was just saying I saw it, sorry.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. So, anti-Semitism is alive and well on social media. And I wanted to just point this out to you, that this is this was a little boy on TikTok. His aunt posted a picture of him putting on tefillin. And after he put on tefillin, there were thousands and thousands of anti-Semitic comments. This video of this boy, there were over 1 million, I think close to 1.5 million views. And the anti-Semitism was just unbelievable. So it just, making that connection and between the past and what's going on today, it's so alive and happening. And I don't know if you're aware of these statistics. These were the latest from the FBI. They have not posted the 2020 yet, but of all the hate crimes, when it came down to religious bias, 60.2% were directed toward Jewish people here in America, and we make up, 2% of the population. Worldwide, we make up 0.018% of the world's population, yet we are the most targeted group for hate crimes per population. And as you know, Holocaust education is mandatory in the state of Illinois. I just wanted to show you that we have work to do. 1/3 of Jewish students experienced anti-Semitism on college campuses in the last school year, according to a survey from the ADL. And if you look at this map, we have students that, can't name a concentration camp. These are our, Gen Z. So we have a lot of work to do, even though, you've got one of the best Holocaust museums in the nation. We need to get that translated into our schools and education. And why I feel it's just so important for me to speak up, and why I encourage so many others to speak up, is I take my strength from Elie Wiesel, where he said, "I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." And finally, I just wanted to share with you that as part of the novel, there is a scene where the students come together and the community comes together at a rally. And one of my main characters, he designs a poster, and it's "Humankind Welcome Here." I have decals that are removable for doors, windows, laptops, and I'm happy to send them to you for free. If you would like it for yourself or grandchildren, children, just reach out to me. If you can't remember my email, no worries. Just find me on my website. And again, I'm happy to send that to you for free. Here's the decal. And now I'd love to answer your questions.
Well, excuse me. We already have one in the chat, which I was going to leave till the end, but I'll make it two-pronged. At the end of the book, Logan gives Kat a note that she will be back for Thanksgiving. Does this mean you're going to write a sequel to this book? And what are you working on now?
A great question. So a lot of people want to know what happens to Kate and Logan. And one thing that I did not show you was how I came up with these teens' names. So I'm going to just push pause on that question and just share a little background. How did I choose the name Logan for a girl? And why did I use the name Cade? First of all, one of the real teens, her name was Jordan, and Jordan was often, her name was, people often said he instead of she. And with the name Logan, when I was looking for an agent to represent my book, an author friend said, "Oh, I'll give you Logan's information, and just, you're welcome to make that contact." And I said, "Oh, is it okay if I tell him, that you gave me his name?" And she said, "Logan is a girl, not a boy. Do not don't mess that up." And I was like, ooh, okay. And so I knew that this was potentially an issue, but of course, in our modern times, gender neutral names are very popular. And so I understand that it kind of makes people work a little bit, but I think it was an important part of speaking up and the story. And then Cade and Mason and Blair and Ava and Liam, those are based on real people, students that I've met, going to high schools across this country and speaking. And those were just really amazing young adults that I met. And finally, regarding the conclusion, the novel is not wrapped up with a nice fancy bow at the end, because especially when it comes down to writing for young adults, you want to let them come up with the conclusion, what's going to happen to those characters. So it's open-ended, and as of this moment, I have no plans to write a sequel. And I have a Jewish picture book coming out in fall of 2023, and that is on tzedakah, that was inspired by the stories that my grandfather told me about his own family. but I put it set in modern times. So there we go.
Okay, that sounds great. All right, well, from our own middle school teacher, Rhonda.
Hi, Rhonda.
Rhonda, I unmuted you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much for coming to present this book. I was really excited to read it because I'm a former English teacher. I finished just 2 years ago in 2020. And back in the dark ages of 1997, I was a second-year English teacher, and I taught a Holocaust literature unit to 8th graders in Mundelein. And if you're not familiar with Mundelein, I was probably the only Jew in the school. And the first book I taught was The Wave, which I know has been referenced on different websites regarding your book. So I was an 8th grade teacher, and this was probably in February or so. So I really understood my classes. And for one day, I did an experiment where I told the kids, because there have been so many behavior problems, I was starting a new method of teaching and encouraging behavior through almost negative reinforcement. And but I stopped it after a day, because as a second-year English teacher, I did not want to create any problems for myself. So it bothers me to see that there I was 26 years old, second-year English teacher, and I am Jewish, and so my background is very much what the Holocaust was and how it impacted our community and the worldwide as well. But it makes me wonder why there's such a disconnect in the adults who are teaching Holocaust, whether it's literature or history, and the ramifications of it. And my only answer, as someone who's not studied this, is that we've normalized it. We've normalized that that's just another part of history, and 6 million people, 10 million people is just a number. And I think we're living through this right now with the numbers of COVID and the numbers of people who have died in our country, and it's just a number. So it's just really interesting to me to have gone through this myself as an educator, knowing how to start it, how to end it. And it was never anything about Nazism. It was more about fascism and how it's so easy to follow that strong man and blame others for their problems. And I just wish that there was a way to educate the educators today, who are my age and younger, who are not Jewish, into how to teach this appropriately and still give access to what 6 million means, what 10 million means. There's a new book out there. I think I texted it to Vanessa a little bit, called Linked, Linked, by Gordon Corman.
Mm-hmm.
I read it and had some really tremendous conversations about it. There were some things I liked, some I didn't. But I thought it really addressed a lot of issues that I think educators could learn. Mm-hmm. So it's really just disturbing to me that people find that this is just an event in history, one to be studied from both sides.
Yeah,
fascinating.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Susan, I'm going to unmute you. There you go.
All right, thank you. There's just two things I'd like to share with you, Liza. First of all, when you talked about not speaking up and wishing we had, many years ago, I was living on an Air Force base in England with my husband, who was an Air Force officer. And we went to a party at which we were the only Jews there, and we were very young, in our 20s. And I had never heard this expression before, but one of the women there talked about, I tried to Jew him down. I had never heard it before, but I was absolutely appalled. I mean, it became clear what she was meaning. And to this day, I regret the fact that I was too meek to speak up and say anything. And I think, I don't do that anymore. The other thing, I don't know if you are aware, but in the state of Illinois, Holocaust studies must be taught in the public schools. And my 17-year-old grandson, who is a junior at Oak Park River Forest High School, is in a whole semester class on the Holocaust being taught by a Jewish instructor.
Wow.
And of course, he's known all about it anyway through his synagogue and our family and all. But he's loving this course and saying that, and all the kids in it are not Jewish.
That's great.
Oh, thank you. Jim Schuster, I know, is on the line, and then I have Ross and Marvin. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, Liza, thank you for sharing this with us. It's the need for it is huge. There's so many pieces of this I could comment on. I'm having a hard time keeping a cork in my mouth at the moment. Whether it be other types of experiments than the Milgram experiments and what to do with it. And Rhonda, pedagogically, they will tell you absolutely no on the simulations and so on, because I've worked with that kind of stuff. But I guess the one thing I wanted to comment on in particular, you talked about this happens in the US too, and heaven knows it does. But I didn't know whether you were aware of the incident that took place, I believe it was in 2017 in Grayslake. We don't have to go very far from here, I guess is my point, with that's a little fuzzy, it's been a few years, but a class that was supposed to create a cartoon
Yes.
from Hitler's perspective, and how that went down, and the complaints to the school board and so on. I mean, you don't have to go to the absurdity in Texas a few weeks back, or God knows the one in Washington. I mean, it's here too.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Thanks.
And I can get you the link, I think, if you are
Yeah,
familiar
I've seen
with
it. I
Yeah,
saw it
okay.
during my research, and it was shocking. I think there was a picture of like a donkey or some kind of animal as one of the cartoons, if I recall. But I know I have it on my screen, and it was appalling.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim, our own Holocaust educator. And Ross, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to tack back what Susan Wellick said, and I see Elaine Haney also commented on that. Yeah, like my first 6 months working in a professional environment in the 1989 as a software engineer for AT&T, who did even back then did a ton of sensitivity training. Got into a meeting with an internal customer, so another AT&T colleague, but it was sort of a negotiation, and we had Solomon, who wasn't in the meeting, and he literally is like, Fred Solomon's out here, and you're trying to, Jew me down. And maybe I was a little young and naive, but I pulled him aside after the meeting. I said, totally acceptable. Like, what are we doing here as a company? And he was like a customer internal, but maybe I was a little braver then. But saw that happen, and I'm sure it still happens today.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Marvin, go ahead.
Well, as a retired salesman, I have a very close friend who's still working as a salesman, and how to counteract when somebody says, I want to Jew him down. So my friend very simply used the words, I'd rather Christian him up. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Marvin.
I don't like that.
Elaine.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to, when I first heard that expression, I just was shocked and I didn't know what to say. But my husband tells a good story before we had met. So he was a young man and he was buying his first car with his father, and they're both Christian. And at the time, now he's more like a practicing Jew. But, the car salesman said to them, well, I wouldn't try to Jew you down. And my father-in-law and my husband both spoke up and said that is not acceptable. That's very offensive. So that makes me feel really good that they were saying things like that before he even knew me.
Wow.
All right, good. I have some questions. First, and I know the answer, but it's because we talked beforehand. Is this going to be made into a movie?
So I do have a film agent, and if you're familiar with the book and the movie, The Hate U Give, I'm represented by the same woman who represented that book. And of course, it is our hope that it will be made into a movie, because what a powerful educational tool, and how important it is to, bring this to life. So yeah, thank you for that question.
I also have another question, which I haven't asked you. You use a lot of people's real names. So after I read the book, I went down a deep internet hole of Googling them and the teacher is still teaching. Can you tell us anything about that? When I found that out, I was, my jaw dropped to the floor.
So the real teacher was fired, and but he soon after got another, teaching job. I do wonder that in 2022, if he would have had such luck getting another teaching job. The only way to get fired in New York is if you don't have tenure, and he didn't have tenure. If he had had tenure, he would have, there was literally, unless he had physically abused children, they would have figured out a different, different story for him. Very challenging situation. So, and here's the thing. I've thought about this a lot. Should teachers that give assignments like this get fired? Is it, and I think we have to look at every situation very carefully. We can't just, generally say every single person should be fired. The teacher in Washington, D.C., to me, what she did to, third graders and telling them, allegedly that they should not tell any other adults. Now we've crossed a line into child abuse. To me, that is, an instantaneous firing. Of course, I don't have all the facts in the background and all the information. I think that's important. I do think that, we are living in a cancel culture. And I also wonder sometimes, what kind of message are we sending to students? When is something anti-Semitic and racist? And when is it just a bad educational decision and a mistake? And we need to have restorative justice. We need to have education. And, we're living in a society today where the first reaction is fire that teacher, get rid of that teacher. I don't want that teacher, a part of my students. And I get that. But I also think that we're missing an opportunity for some really good education. Like the teacher in Irvine, California, she was just teaching Brown University's, AP World History. She thought it was great. Certainly had a phenomenal reputation. Yeah. So, what do we do? I think her actions afterward very much mimicked what we saw in my novel. She doubled down, she said it's not personal, and she refused to listen to the student. And without a doubt, her ego came into play. Yeah. On the other hand, I've seen teachers who have said, oh my goodness, I'm horrified that I did this. This was so wrong. And, I apologize. And, they talk about it. So, yeah, there's a lot to think about there.
I have another, Lee Rivlin has a question. Lee, go ahead.
Hi, yes, I have a question. Interested in your opinion. I was actually, it was a local, it was an exercise class. So, and the teacher was telling some joke. I don't even remember. The punchline was Greenland, but but it was green meaning Jewish, people meaning money. It was a, thinly veiled, I thought, anti-Semitic comment. It was not at all a funny joke. And I knew, demographically, I knew I had the room behind me just because of where I was with and who I was among. And while I was so tempted to totally call her out then and there, I held my tongue and I took her aside afterward and explained how very offensive that was. And she felt terrible. But my question is, in your opinion, is it better to call that person out in front of others or to wait until later and take that person aside?
I think the way you handled it, especially because you have a relationship with that person, I think the way you handled it was beautiful. I think to cause embarrassment to individuals is something that can be very harmful and could be damaging. And certainly that person's not going to make that mistake again. And you educated her. Now, if that person had been rude, then that and doubled down and said there was nothing wrong with what I said, I think that I think then that would be a different story. I think you handled it beautifully. And Elaine, I see in the chat, is agreeing with, say praise in public, criticize in private. So someone asked about the Jewish community. Gail did.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah. So I actually met one of the very few Jewish people that were living in Oswego. I think at that time there were under, two handfuls. I mean, there is a Chabad on campus because there's SUNY Oswego. But, there was kind of a disconnect between the college campus and the general community at large. And the community at large had a very, very small population. And the woman that I actually met, and she had me over for a wonderful lunch, they actually moved away from Oswego. So now the population is even smaller.
Hi, Jack has a question or comment. Jack, go ahead.
Thank you. About the situation where there was a speaker who said something inappropriate. I appreciate the discretion and taking her aside and having a private conversation. And perhaps it's true that she'll be more careful in the way she expresses herself in the future. But I have a differing view on that. And that is that in her speaking in front of a group and not being called out, not having something said, plants the seed for other people to do the same thing. And a public airing, I think, was called for. Not an attack on her, but something to get across, hey, regardless of intention, what you said is offensive. Let people know. No, you can't say Jewed him down or whatever the comment might have been. No, that's not okay. And I think people need to hear that message. So that's what you get from me. I was absent the day they taught subtle.
I actually thought about what you were saying, Jack. It's, and I think there's a lot of validity to exactly what you're saying. And that's a very important point because, who is this audience? I kind of got the impression from Lee that there were other Jewish people within that group that knew that it was wrong. And so maybe I was reading that a little bit differently. There's the other issue of modeling for other people and speaking up and saying, this is what we do. What I have found in this process is that we have to find our own comfort zone. I love the fact that, Jack, you would be like right there and do it in a polite and respectful way. But there is our human, we have these reactions where some people freeze and then afterward go, oh my gosh, why didn't I say something? Then there are the people, that come out fighting. And I think you're probably a fighter and will just say, hey, that was not okay. That was wrong. And then, we have the people that would actually turn around and just walk away. Those that will have that flight. I think it takes practice. Yeah. And so I agree that your approach would have been very appropriate, but I also don't want Lee to think that what she did was inappropriate. It definitely was okay. And what she was comfortable with. And if you noticed in my novel is very unique in how it's written. We have the two main characters written in first person, and then we have secondary characters written in third person. And then there's video chats and comments from articles, quotes, all sorts of things integrated. There was a reason why I did that, and it really speaks to what Jack was saying, is that we have to show and model, for individuals, different ways of speaking up. Many people could not do what, Jordan and Archer did, and my main characters, Kate and Logan, did, and address this hate head on. But they may have been able to react like my secondary characters, Heather or Daniel or Mason. And so we have to, speaking up is a muscle, and we have to practice that. We have to find our voice. For some people, just naturally feel comfortable. But there are others that have to find that comfort zone. So part of that structure to that. Yeah, Jack.
Yeah, if I could just piggyback on that. I come from a background of being a world-class pleaser. I don't want to upset other people. I want to be thought well of. And yeah, well, we have to get past that. We have to be willing to model for other people, to speak up when there is a wrong. Someone did that for me. He was a strong fella and he spoke up, and I listened and I thought, that's it. We have to speak up. In the absence of our speaking up, of course, it just invites worse. And we have thousands of years of knowing how that goes. So
beautifully said.
Yeah, so I think we need to get past our some of us natural fear of the repercussions of offending others and speak up. Again, politely, respectfully, but speak up.
Yeah, beautifully said.
I know that in our public schools and even in our Love Learning, we talk a lot about upstanders. And this is a topic that our kids are learning and exercising that muscle. And as parents and grandparents, it's something that we can talk to them about and tell stories and continue the story. Elaine said that she gave your a book 5 stars, and she reads a lot of book, and I can attest to that. And so a couple of things. If you want Lisa's the
decal,
I couldn't think of the word. Or if you want her to send you an autographed plate for your book, go on her website. You'll be able to contact her. She's been so gracious to talk with us. We do have one more question. What are your thoughts on the Paperclip project? And very quickly, it's a project in Tennessee where they tried to get 1 million paper clips to show kids how much is 1 million. Those 6 million, you can't even imagine it. It's hard for them to think about it.
I think it's a very powerful lesson. They, that particular community ended up getting a cattle car that was shipped to them, and they put all those paper clips in that cattle car. And that book that was mentioned, linked, actually was about, was inspired, by that. I have not read that book, but from everything that I've heard, the biggest difference is that this very much addresses and makes that connection. My novel makes the connection between the past and what's going on in society today. But I think it's a great, project that was done, and helps students to visualize. It takes a lot to collect all those paper clips. So
Ross just said, 6 million would be 10 years of home games attendance at Michigan Stadium. And being a Michigan alma mater and having taught religious school there, that is exactly the same fact. And all the kids in Michigan can visualize that. We might have to use some other stadiums here because the big house is very big. We can't thank you enough, Liza. This has been so delightful. We can't wait to read more of your books. If you haven't read the book, you'll really enjoy it. If you have a teen, if you have someone who's interested in that, please send that book along to them. And thank you, everybody. Next Sunday is Dr. Willie Cobb, and he is going to talk about a Black man's journey, just in time for Martin Luther King weekend. There's Tu B'Shvat Seders happening. We got a lot going on. Check your Macomb at home. If you need anything, contact me. It's great seeing everyone. Stay warm, stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you again, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.